Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hey guys, welcome to another awesome episode of the MBOM podcast. Today I have a really special yoga teacher who I'm going to be chatting with. Her name's Brea Johnson, and she has been in and out of Canmore, where I was spending 14 months living in sort of 2014, 2015. And we never crossed paths because she's currently up in Edmonton, Alberta. But through my good friend Jeff Ma, who's been on the podcast, the owner of the Yoga Lounge, he connected me with Brea, and they're currently running a teacher training, himself, Brea, and then Lydia Zamorano. And so I looked at Brea's website, which is heartandbonesyoga.com, and I was immediately intrigued by her. She seems to have this really cool background and interesting experience, everything from teaching to owning a studio to running retreats to doing workshops and now this teacher training. So I felt like she was just perfect for the podcast. And so now that I've interviewed her, I'm super excited to bring this episode to you guys because she just has an amazing way about her. She has learned so much, which she shares with you guys on the podcast. And she really shares authentically her experience as a studio owner, what it was like for her as a new teacher, and so many recommendations for all the new teachers out there. So without further ado, here is Brea Johnson. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today, Brea. It's pretty awesome to have you here, talking about all the experience that you have with yoga and the business of yoga. Let's just get right into it. Where did you first discover yoga?
I discovered yoga actually, originally I discovered yoga from a Shivananda yoga book from my mom had when I was a kid, and we used to pull out the pictures and try to copy. So he was doing all these crazy moves, we used to try to play around and do those crazy moves, and then that was kind of fun. And then I let it all go and forgot about it. And I was living in Hawaii for a couple months when I was 19 and met a girl who was a yoga teacher, and she had just finished her teacher training, and we became friends, and she let me go to her class, and it was horrible. I was really unflexible. I remember going through sun salutations being like, like my foot couldn't even step forward in that jump through or in that little lunge. But I remember leaving the class feeling like, whoa, what is this? Physically, it was so hard, but I was so enamored and so intrigued. I remember asking her, like, who are like, this is from like thousands of years ago? Like these men for thousands of years ago did this? Like what? Like it was just really intriguing. And so I just played around with yoga on the beaches of Maui and came back to Canada, and then ended up moving to Toronto and started to do some karma yoga at a yoga studio there. So I got to have free classes and try out all sorts of different types of styles. And then just from there, it was just love and exploration and learning. And
I love those stories where it's like, it seems to be this really fascinating thing for people when they do it. Because a lot of people make yoga look really easy, and it's really not easy in so many ways.
Mm-hmm. No, not at all. Not at all. And I think for me as a teacher, that's one of my biggest things. And that's always been my biggest thing, is try to keep yoga very accessible to people. And even on the business side of it, whenever I've done postcards or flyers or anything, back when I owned a studio, or even just still on my own website, I very consciously never put extreme poses, like all of the imagery that I put out there is really like I try to make it very applicable and approachable, because I don't want to perpetuate this image that yoga is this really circusy advanced movement type thing. So it's, it's very, for me, that's very, very conscious to do that, so that more people can feel more just that, they look at the image and, I can do this, instead of like, oh my God, that person's legs around their head, I'll never do that.
Yeah, that's a really great idea, actually, because you see so many like marketing tools, Instagram accounts, everything is about like doing these really cool poses, and it can be really intimidating. Like even for me, there's so many of those poses that I mean, hopefully one day I'll get my body into them, but I'm just not there right now.
Well, and my question then is, and should you get your body? You know, there's this image that and you're right with Instagram especially, you know, there's these images that they look really cool. These poses are awesome. And yeah, cool. Can I do this one day? But I often think, like, should you? Do we need that extreme flexibility? Is that going to serve you in your life later on? Maybe, maybe not. Or maybe it's fun to do and fun to play with, of course. But that's not the goal.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and something that people kind of like lose touch with, that it's not about, you know, taking photos of yourself doing cool things. Like that's a fun thing for a lot of people, and you can definitely do that, but it's not like losing sight of the actual purpose of practicing yoga or teaching yoga as well.
Exactly. Oh my goodness. Yes.
And so at what point did you take it from being a practitioner of yoga to a practitioner and a teacher?
Well, I was teaching, so it was 1999, which sounds crazy. Not far, just on the edge of the 2000s. So it was 1999 when I first discovered yoga, really. I'd done a little bit prior, but it was that trip in Hawaii that really got me into it. And then I think it was 2003 is when I took my teacher training, but I also was teaching a little bit ahead of time before then. Like I would just teach friends, or I remember a friend I was teaching in some like a friend of mine is a school teacher, so I was teaching teachers in his class and whatnot. So I was already teaching and then did the teacher training and in 2003 and those were the crazy days, as we had previously mentioned about, you know, like I finished my teacher training and I immediately started teaching 25 classes a week.
Holy, that's crazy.
I was like the co-manager of a yoga studio that was just opening it. You know, and I don't think that happens anymore. You know, there's way more yoga classes out there, but back in those days, which weren't at the same time that long ago. It was 12, 13 years ago. But, I jumped like headfirst into teaching and it was crazy and it was good. I don't recommend it. I don't recommend teaching 25 classes a week.
Yeah, that's mental.
Yeah. But you know, what a great way to learn.
Yeah. So you were just teaching yoga then, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, you weren't balancing another job on top of that, were you?
No. Since then I have not had another job. I've been a full-time yoga teacher since I've started teaching.
Yeah, that's incredible. You just knew like right away that it was something that you really were passionate about and that you wanted to do.
Yeah, for the most part, I've definitely had moments, you know, where, especially after a couple of years of teaching so much, like again, 25 classes a week, you don't have time for your own practice. There's no balance there. It's a lot of giving. So definitely there were times where I was like, I'm out. I'm going to do something different. And, you know, I owned the yoga studio for a couple years and got really burnt out with that. And when I eventually sold the studio, I was moving out to a different place, into a more small, quiet mountain town. And I was ready to just retire. I was like, I'm done. I'm in semi-retirement, so to speak. But then it just keeps calling me back. And I can't leave the practice and the teaching. It's a passion.
Yeah, no, that's amazing.
An ever evolving passion.
Yeah. And it's cool too, like how many different options that you can do with yoga teaching. And I think that, you know, your yoga teaching career is a great example of that. Where did you own your yoga studio? In
Edmonton, Alberta.
Amazing. And what was that experience like? Obviously you said you got burnt out, but.
Yeah, it was, so again, that was 2005 or 2004. It was not something I was seeking. I didn't want to open up a yoga studio, but a friend of mine had owned a business a friend of mine had bought a building downtown and he phoned me up one day and he's like, hey, have you ever thought about opening up a yoga studio? And I was like, maybe when I'm 50, you know, and I've been doing this for a long time. And he's like, well, I've got this building that I just bought and there's this space that would make an amazing yoga studio. You should come down and check it out. And I was just like, fine, I'll come down. I'll see. We'll just see. And then I showed up and he offered me a fantastic deal. It was a lovely little space. And I just sat with it over the weekend, I remember, and just my intuition said, yeah, let's do this. And I did it. And so I was 24 at the time when that happened, and no business experience, but I think I've got a very natural business mind, you know, and as a kid, I was always doing little lemonade stands and entrepreneur things. Yeah. So I think it kind of just naturally, I felt comfortable in that role.
Yeah.
As business owner, as marketer and all that. That wasn't a big step for me, which I know a lot of people it would be.
Yeah.
A big step for them. A lot of yoga teachers aren't good business people necessarily, just like a lot of artists aren't necessarily have that business awareness. Mm-hmm. But it was hard too, you know, I opened it at a good time in the city. There was only maybe 2 or 3 other studios. I think 2 off the top of my head. I can't remember. Let's say 2 or 3 studios at the time. And I'd already had students from the previous studio I was at. So it grew and we won, a couple best of the city awards, and that felt really good, and just really developed this beautiful community, a really homey, wonderful, welcoming, warm community. And yet it was hard because it was all me. Mm-hmm. And I remember the times when I got really, really overworked or really frustrated or really just tired and done. It would always come down to I was tired of holding space, like holding the literal, actual space of the studio, holding space for my teachers, the teachers who are teaching at the studio, and then holding space for the students as well. And it was just a lot of energy out there that really it was too much. I didn't have enough time to replenish myself. Mm-hmm. So it was hard. And I had some wonderful help and people who were teaching and helping at the studio, but it got to a point where I was done. I wanted to be out of the city. I wanted to not have that responsibility anymore. And I was really fortunate to have somebody in a position to buy the studio. So I was able to sell it and retire early. Just kidding.
No, that's amazing. What were some of the biggest business lessons that you learned from owning your yoga studio?
The first thing that comes to mind is staying true to what's right for you. And that's hard. And at the time that I had the studio, so me as a teacher, me as a person, I don't like to follow trends. I don't do the more popular things. I'm really, as I said before, really about accessibility, about making yoga a place where people can feel comfortable, where anybody for me, I'm very not mainstream. And that's a very conscious choice. And so my studio is not very mainstream at all. Mm-hmm. And at that time, it really worked. But at the time, throughout the years that I had it, that's when Bikram yoga started to get more popular, and some of these hot yoga started to get more popular. And I remember going into the Bikram yoga studio when it first opened on a Monday afternoon. And it was packed at a time that my studio downtown, I think it was this odd time of 2:00, let's say. Yeah. It was packed out, and I was just like, this will never happen at my studio. And then I had this moment of having to check in, do I want to be, having that moment as a business owner where do you want a successful money-making studio? So then do you offer the hot yoga, for instance, or do I stay true to what's right for me and what I believe in? And how do you find that balance? So that was definitely hard. That was because you kind of have to play the game. If you want to be a successful teacher, especially in terms of the business side of it, with owning the actual nuts and bolts brick and mortar studio, you do kind of have to play the game a little bit, or not. I don't know. It depends on your location. It depends on the city you're in. It depends on so many different factors. And that was always something that I had a challenge navigating. And of course, stayed within what was true to me. And it was successful. And the studio itself actually still is running. It's one of the longest running studios in the city now. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, and the new owner, she has stayed true to her vision, which was similar to mine. So that's good to know. That's nice. It's definitely not your big fancy box store yoga studio, which still has its own benefits too. Yeah,
definitely. And I think that it's one of those things where it's tough because you kind of gotta, decide what you want. Do you want to be the biggest, most popular, highest revenue yoga studio in the city and give people, what's in the magazines, what's on the internet, like what they think is cool? Or do you want to offer what you want to offer and attract the people who are really going to be seeking out what you offer?
Mm-hmm. And it's hard to say, and it's tricky. And again, when you have money and invested into it, or when you have rent to pay and teachers to pay, you kind of you got to be clear on what you're doing and how you're doing it. So, and it is. And so it's interesting to see over these years of like just how saturated the market's been. And in fact, seeing, so many different yoga studios opening up. Let's say Edmonton still, for instance, so, there's only a few studios when we first opened. And then now I don't even know how many studios are in that city. And a lot of them have closed as well in the meantime. So it's an interesting cycle to see.
Yeah. It seems oh, go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say yoga seems to be like it's like a buzzword now. Like people want to do yoga because it's cool to do yoga. Which it is, as somebody who really loves yoga, I think it's cool that more people want to do yoga. But then as a yoga teacher, it's kind of like, I want to be able to teach the type of yoga that resonates with me and not have people who are like, I just want to do like push-ups and sweat a lot. And I'm like, well, go to the gym then if that's what you want to do. But then I don't want to turn them off of yoga. So it's kind of like finding it's this really fine line, I feel like, with opening a yoga studio, being a yoga teacher, what type of classes you offer and all that sort of thing.
Well, it's a fine line between what does the person want or what does the person think they want, and you as the teacher with the experience and the knowledge and the training give them what they need.
Yeah, definitely.
And finding that balance between both of those. And that can be, and sometimes that's a non-issue. Sometimes if you teach a class called yin, let's say, or if you teach a very specific class, people know what they're going to get into. But I found that gray zone is in, let's say if you taught a class called, like, just come to a flow class. So you'll have definitely some people who would think that they're going to get this really strong, like, it's a flow class. I want vinyasa. I want this strong intensity. And I'm sure you'll also have other people in that class who are just like, I just want to move. I don't want necessarily something so strong. And so navigating that place where, how do you give that feeling of a strong class without hurting them?
Yeah,
definitely. And it's a delicate dance. And I think a big part of that is getting adequate training in terms of understanding movement and in terms of understanding, well, how can you make something strong for somebody, so to speak, and yet keep it safe, because you could do a strong class and offer 10, 15, 20 chaturangas in the class, and you'll feel like at the end of that class, you'll feel like you've gotten your strong active workout, but at the potential of hurting your shoulders because odds are you're not doing those chaturangas properly, for example. So it's always an interesting navigational space of, as a teacher, like, what do people think they want? So really, just navigating what the students think they want, what the market thinks it wants too, because especially if you're in the studio, it's like, what are the classes that are going to get people in, and you do have to play that game. Like, and I see that that's changing. It's changing in every location. It's changing in every city. The needs, I'm seeing hot yoga maybe as an example is really not as popular as it was maybe a couple of years ago. People are wanting, in my experience, something a little bit more solid around alignment, like more solid around, well, I want to move in a way that my body feels good and doesn't give me pain and injury, because pain and injury happens in yoga too.
Yeah.
Surprise, surprise.
I know. It's so sad that it's something that's designed to be healing for your body and like very meditative and just this really like beautiful thing for your physical body is hurting people.
It is. And it's an interesting place to be in right now in the yoga world, because we've been taught for so many years that yoga is going to heal you. Yoga will transform you. Yoga will save your life. Yoga. And in a lot of ways that's true. but it's also not true. And it's also does us a disservice because objectively, any sort of movement that we do, any sort of physical practice can potentially create injury and set us up. And especially going back to those really fancy or dramatic postures, not everybody should do this. And or if that body might have been in an office chair for 8 hours and then, leave the office, come to their class for an hour and start to do all these extreme movements that aren't actually that supportive for the body. Right. So so I feel as a yoga teacher in this modern world now that we live in, where yes, we should move. Yes, we should do our yoga postures and our practice, but knowing the context in which we live in. And as a teacher, knowing the context in which most of your students live and are coming from. So again, most people, if you're teaching a 5 o'clock class, an evening class, most people are coming from work. And if I can make an assumption, most people are coming from that office job. Yeah. And so then asking them to go into this really extreme back bend can be not the most helpful thing that they need. Yeah. And for some bodies, it can be fine and it can feel great. But having this understanding and going back to more training around, what is human movement? What are these more biomechanical ways of moving that we actually need in our bodies? So, yeah.
And have you just continued to do training throughout your career? Like, obviously, you've done more than just your 200 level teaching.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Ongoing. And one of the benefits going back to those 25 classes a week that, as tiring as that became, one of the benefits that came out of that was that I became so bored of teaching downward dog, or teaching, because 25 classes, I'm like, how many times out of that am I doing downward dog? How many times am I repeating the same thing over and over and over? So I was bored of it, and I wanted to try to find a different vocabulary or a different way of teaching the same pose, right? What's a new fun way that we can get into these things? So that desire, that repetition really helped me go, okay, I want to learn more. I need to learn more. So I always have been taking workshops and more training. And in my journey, after I had sold the studio and took a little bit of a hiatus from teaching for a bit, I ended up getting pregnant and then had a baby. So that was a nice, good hiatus. And then that's when I started teaching again when he was about 6 months old, 1 year old. And I came back into the yoga world and it just didn't feel right anymore. Something wasn't fitting. And so I had what I called my yoga existential crisis where I didn't know where I fit into the whole picture, and I didn't know what I wanted out of this, or I kind of knew what I wanted didn't fit with what the popular culture of yoga was for me. Yeah. And so I really did a lot of self-searching because for me, it's always, again, how do I make this accessible? I'm such a body nerd. I love movement. I love looking at bodies. I love, when I used to have time, I used to do figurative drawing and painting because movement, the human form is so beautiful to me. And it really became even more beautiful the more bodies I taught in that physical context of yoga. Yeah. And yet I wasn't interested in doing these extreme things. I wasn't interested, and I didn't feel like I was serving my students if I was giving them this extreme, strong practice. I was seeing too much of a wide array of students in the class, and I knew I didn't have the tools to totally serve them health, as well as what they actually need. You know what I mean? So in this existential crisis, it was like I just was in between these two poles of I see popular yoga here going into this kind of yoga and just your leg here, arm there, look at my Instagram type fancy pose thing, and knowing that that's not resonating for me, that's not going to resonate for the people that I work with. And so where do I fit in this? And if I want to grow as a teacher, and if I want to have success, air quotes, as a teacher, at that time, it felt like the only way to achieve that success was to go down this road of okay, well now I got to start doing even more fancy, dramatic yoga poses to, oh, look at Bree, she can do like, and that was not me. And that was not authentic to who I am. Yeah. So after much searching, I ended up going outside of the yoga world and taking a whole bunch of training in biomechanics and alignment and anatomy. And primarily with Katie Bowman, she's this biomechanics scientist, fantastic woman who is getting more and more well known. So maybe some of the listeners will know Katie Bowman, Katy Bowman. She's nutritious movement. And, because there was a lot of stuff in yoga that for a lot of years I intuitively felt wasn't right. There were certain movements that we would do or certain cues or instructions that I was like, yeah, I don't know about this, but I didn't have anything to back that up. I just had my intuition. I just had years of experience of working with different bodies, working with my own body, but I didn't have that solid, this is not right because of that. I was just like, yeah, I don't think we should do this, but I don't know why. Yeah. And then when I met her and then I started to study with her and do the training, it just, all of my intuition was validated. And then I had the science to back it up. Mm-hmm. And so for me personally, my journey, I had to leave yoga, so to speak, learn more about the body, learn more about biomechanics and human movement than to feed my yoga practice. And ever since then, it's all changed. So I came out of my yoga existential crisis with this renewed passion for what I'm doing and what I can offer to the world. And what I really feel the yoga world needs is more understanding of this. So a lot of my work now is working with teachers, teaching teachers how to know movement. And I emphasize that, like, movement first, asana second. Mm-hmm. Understand some of the basics, just the foundational workings of how the physical body, not even just anatomy, but how does the physical body work objectively outside of yoga, get a sense of that, and then apply those principles to asana. So I always like to say in my trainings, it's like, yoga's kind of like this fancy dance steps, but we need to learn how to walk before we can do the fancy dance steps. Yeah. And then you can do those fancy dance steps. So back to those Instagram worthy photos or videos, you can do those, but you can do them in a way that you're not going to create wear and tear on your joints. You can do it in a way that it's sustainable for the long term. Mm-hmm. So that's been my journey in that sense as a teacher, and it's been fabulous. And I see too, it's really, I feel, and I've been saying this for a couple years now, but I really feel in a couple more years, let's say, just throw out a number, here's my prophecy, in 5 years, this approach is going to be way more prevalent. More and more people, I'm just seeing it, more and more people are wanting to know, well, how do I move? How can I prevent injury? How can I create a safe space physically and emotionally for my students in my classes? So it's a huge step forward, and I'm really excited about where it's all going to go.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that, because my boyfriend and I were talking about how there's sort of this shift towards this whole movement thing that we've kind of noticed just in our small networks. We have a friend from Banff who started movement classes out there, kind of in line with Ido Portal's stuff. And
awesome.
Yeah, it's just super cool. And there's, I think, this whole thing going around on Instagram where you can join this movement community. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we'll see what the prophecy shows, but my boyfriend's confident as well. Yes. He's like, I don't know if I should get my yoga teacher training or just try to get really good at movement.
Well, and that's a lot of what my trainings are now is sure. Or I say yoga is my gateway word.
Yeah.
Come to my quote, quote, yoga class. But, if you actually come to a lot of my classes, we don't do a lot of asana anymore, because it's more focused on movement. Because what is asana really? So there's this perception that yoga asana has been this unbroken chain of teachings or yoga in general from those thousands of years ago. from the ancient yogis to now, it's been this unbroken lineage of here's yoga. But that's not truly the case. And especially with the yoga asana, that's only been around in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And many of them, and many of our really popular ones, like Wild Thing, right, from the Anusara lineage, that was made up like 10 years ago. You know, don't quote me on that. I don't know exactly.
Like the exact year, but yeah.
That one was founded but you know, like it's, a lot of the asana we do are new. And again, going back to Instagram, and it always makes me laugh because sometimes I've seen poses that somebody has some Sanskrit name that I'm
Hi.
So I've seen poses that somebody has some Sanskrit name that I'm like, I've never seen this before. Like, this is made up. And somebody just threw some Sanskrit name around it. But we think that's yoga. And so my point here is that yes, it's yoga, and yes, a calf stretch is yoga, or an everyday natural movement is yoga, because yoga asana is just a shape our body can be in. Mm-hmm. It's in my opinion, it's completely objective, or subjective like that. It's just a shape, and it's just a shape that we've all agreed we can call Warrior One. That's a shape, and we all agree. Downward dog. We'll call that this particular shape, downward facing dog, but it's just a shape, and our bodies need to move in all these sorts of shapes. But when you understand movement science a little bit more, you start to realize that yoga asana in the traditional sense is not giving us enough of the movements that we actually need. We're missing. It gives us some fantastic movements, and it can create so much stability and strength and flexibility, mobility, but it also leaves other body parts out a little bit, right? So it doesn't get into some of the nooks and crannies that we need to move, you know, it's interesting. So with those movement classes, and as you can see, that movement is kind of this big thing. I'm so excited about that, because having that blend of the movement worlds, like Ido Portal, although he's kind of extreme, but totally awesome.
He is pretty extreme.
You know, but awesome. But, you know, like, it's like, let's even look at, for instance, in yoga, there's never any pulling.
Yeah.
Right. So let's say like a hanging from a tree or hanging from a chin-up bar, pulling that the ability to pull yourself upright. We don't do that. So we're missing that, or as my teacher Katie calls it, we're missing these movement nutrients.
Yeah.
So yoga gives us a lot of different nutrients, but we're also missing some. So that's like we're missing vitamin pulling. Yeah. in a practice. So having this understanding or this perception that yoga is going to give you everything you need, and I'm talking more physically right now. Yeah. Yoga is going to give you everything you need. It's not. It's going to give you a lot, and if you don't do anything, it's going to give you even more than what you were doing before. But it needs to become more integrated, in my opinion. You need to integrate the really cool work that a lot of different people are bringing out there, like Katie, like and some other people as well, lots of other people.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that we kind of got talking about that, because I mean, as a teacher, it's something that I kind of struggle with. I feel like there's like these poses that we do in yoga, and I'm like, we're doing these like, every day, constantly, and your body gets so used to them. And when my boyfriend showed me Ido Portal, we had like a perfect hanging spot in our house that we used to live in, and it was so hard for me. Yeah. And like, I have pretty open shoulders. Like, I have pretty strong shoulders from doing, hundreds of chaturangas in a week. But then I go to like hang, and it's like literally feels like my arms are ripping off. So. Yeah, exactly. And that's what I found too. The first time I tried hanging, I thought the same thing. It's like, I can do an arm balance. I'm strong. And then I could barely, because I was at the monkey bars with my son, and I was like, yeah, I can do this. No. I couldn't. Kids can just do it like crazy, and we just can't do it.
No, and we lose that. And there's so many layers to that too, because part of it is, like you might have the strength, but your grip strength might not be there, because we never really use our hands in that way. When are we ever gripping things anymore, other than your phone to text or whatnot?
So, your coffee to drink.
So you're gripping from the stress. But we don't do that. We don't use our hands in a physical capacity like we used to back whenever, back from
caveman
pre-industrial era to the good old days. So Yeah. So yeah, we miss that. And I think those who aren't open in the yoga world, I hope there's not that many people, but if the yoga world doesn't evolve, then we're missing out, and I mean, if the yoga world doesn't evolve into acknowledging these missing movement nutrients. And in my experience, when I've brought this into my classes and when my teaching has evolved down this way, people, I love it. I've been teaching for 13 years, and people always enjoy it, but I've never seen people get it like they've got it now, where somebody will come to one of my classes and then, I'll show them some of these different movements or these kind of, in a way you can look at it like a broken down ways of like yoga deconstructed. It's like we're almost deconstructing some of our asana, breaking down into these component parts, and people feel this in their body, and it's just like, oh my God, I've never felt like this, and it just feels right. So the enthusiasm and it's like this, you feel it in your own body, and you're like, yes, okay, that is right. And so it's been so gratifying to see that response from so many different people, because it feels, you feel the difference of how approaching movement in a different sort of way feels in the body, and breaking down those component parts and whatnot. It's amazing.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And so at what point did you start your company? It's Heart and Bones, right?
Yeah. The Heart and Bones. So I kind of look, that was a conscious, so a lot of people, you're a teacher, and I'm just going to say, like, you being, those listening. So if you're a yoga teacher out there and you're like, okay, well, how do I promote myself? Most people, and I think this is more recommended anyways, is to promote yourself as yourself, right? Like, I should be BreaJohnsonYoga.com, but for me personally, I had this insight after teaching a weekend immersion. I was driving away and the words heart and bones came into my brain, and I was like, oh my God, I love that. That's it. This is great. And because for what I want to do and what I teach, I don't want it to be about me. I don't want it to be Brea Johnson, like yoga star. Like, I want it to be about heart and bones. I want it to be this other entity that I'm running, and it is me, but it's not me. You know what I mean? So that was my conscious choice of doing that. Heart and Bones it's always an ever evolving entity. It's just, it is me, I guess, as I was saying, but it's just offering teacher trainings and all my workshops and yeah, but the Heart and Bones was really about, a bunch of different meanings on this of like the heart. Yeah. And then your actual literal beating heart. Yeah. And the bones, the foundation, that structure, that stability, and the body geekery, like the passion for the human form,
Yeah,
and
that's super cool. It's interesting with naming yoga companies because, so I've majored in marketing, so I've got a background in marketing. And everything I've learned about naming a company is like, don't ever call yourself. Like, don't call yourself Amanda Kingsmith Advertising. Like, that's a terrible name. People don't want that.
Okay.
It seems like though it is this, Brea Johnson Yoga or, Jeff Ma Yoga. Like, it just seems to be what people do in the yoga business. I love that you're also marketing a different name.
Yeah. Well, and I can see how it's like that. And because a lot of the yoga business, so let's talk yoga business now, which I love it. Do you have another 3 hours that we can keep chatting about this? The yoga business is also personality business, right? So you're not, generally speaking, most people are marketing their personalities. You are your own brand.
Yeah.
And if you look at the rise of a lot of really popular teachers, they may not be great teachers, maybe, but a lot of them are really great personalities. Or you look at the rise of some really popular teachers who are really bendy, let's say. And I'm thinking of one right now where just put these little sped up videos of you and your super bendy body on social media. then people love watching this stuff, right? They love watching the body do all this crazy stuff. And then all of a sudden, so the general consensus starts to think this person is really good at what they're doing. When probably many of the people who are crazy bendy have had a gymnastics or a dance background, or just have that body type that easily does that. Doesn't necessarily mean they're a good practitioner or teacher or know what they're doing physically like that. But it's this, like this mystique and that yoga teacher star and that yoga teacher celebrity and that yoga teacher personality. So I'm not surprised that it is, like Brea Johnson yoga or so-and-so yoga, because you're selling your personality and that's fine. And that works for some people. And I think if you're a person who is just starting out and you want to start teaching and you're like, well, how do I start branding myself? How do I get myself out there? My biggest advice would be find your niche.
Yeah.
Like find the niche of so whether your niche is a different business name, like soulyogalove.com or Sally Joe Yoga, the name doesn't matter as much, but what can you offer, and what can you offer that's a little bit different than everybody else? Because everybody's kind of done the same, essentially. Let's just say that a lot of people have done the same 200-hour training at different places, but if you're going under Yoga Alliance, it's all going to be kind of the same.
Yeah.
So how do you make yourself different? What's your niche? What are you passionate about in yoga, and how can you offer that to other people? So for the heart and bones, for me, it was just like, I don't want it to be about me. It will be about me, but I don't want it to be about me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I definitely get it. It sounds like a bit confusing, but I feel like it makes sense.
Yeah. But that's interesting that you say that about what you've learned in school, because I would have almost thought, because maybe this is what I see in the yoga world, is that because part of me was like, ooh, is this a bad marketing idea to do heart and bones yoga as opposed to like marketing Brea Johnson?
Yeah.
So that's interesting that in what you've learned is the opposite.
Yeah. I just learned that it was like almost like a cop out of coming up with a good name for what you're offering. Cause it's like somebody already gave you your name, so you'll just use it to slap it on, like, whatever you're doing, like Amanda Kingsmith's homemade lemonade, like.
Yeah,
that sort of thing. But I think there's, pros and cons to it. And especially in yoga, like you make a great point, you are selling yourself. So you can either sell your name so people know who you are, especially like if you're looking to be a bigger scale teacher and teach at big festivals or big like international yoga gigs. Like it's cool to have your name because then people know it's you.
Exactly.
But I love the idea of sort of just following whatever feels good to you though, and kind of not having a rule as to what you should be doing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. With awareness though, and with a sense of intuition too. I think if you don't already have that business mind, go ask for advice, talk to as many different people, listen to more episodes of this podcast to learn, different ways to figure out what's right for you and what makes more sense. But I think the niche thing makes a big difference, so I know some people who are so passionate. Like I actually have a friend who she used to be a social worker and then she quit that and then has been teaching yoga. And lately she's been reapproaching how she can integrate both things, right? So how she can still, what made her passionate enough to get into social work in the first place, but now how can she integrate those skills with what she's doing as a yoga teacher? And I feel like that's a really beautiful niche and for her it's quite successful and it's growing and growing and growing, as opposed to her just being like, I'm a yoga teacher, just like the 25 million other ones out there. And like teaching workshops, for instance, how many back bending workshops are out there in the world? How many arm balancing workshops? Like those are a dime a dozen these days. So if you want to start to approach a yoga studio to teach a workshop on offering back bending or inversion workshop, like what do you love? Do you love relaxation? Do you love yin? Like what's that niche that really calls to you? And because that's also going to be the authentic part of you that's successful as a teacher and that people will resonate. So instead of trying to fit into some box that all the other yoga teachers are in, what's authentic to you? And I feel like that's where success can come.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's great advice. And especially I'm part of like one of 3 managers on Jeff's yoga lounge team. And I know with a studio like that, so many people pass through and they want to offer workshops. And it's like, we've got teachers who teach backbending. We've got teachers who can get us upside down. If you don't have something that's cool to offer our community, sorry.
It's true. Yeah. And especially if you're somebody that nobody knows, so to speak, sadly, like it's kind of like that. Oh, and that's another piece of advice that I'd love to give from having been a studio owner is I was always so surprised at how many people would try to come in to apply to teach there and either email a resume or just drop one off, having never been to the studio before. Mm-hmm. And I never once followed through on any of that because I was like, I don't know you. I don't know. Do you, and not just I don't know you, but do you know the studio? This is a very specific feeling type studio here. Mm-hmm. And those who ever got hired at the studio, and I hired people straight out of their teacher trainings only because I would have known them, right? Only because they kept coming to the studio and kept coming to the classes often. So I knew the person and I got a sense of who they were. So I felt confident giving them the job to teach at the studio. So I know other people who own studios too who mentioned this, where it's just we're quite surprised at how many people just email a resume. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to get you anywhere. If you want to start teaching, especially nowadays where there's so much competition for yoga classes, to have your own yoga class, and there's a studio that you really want to teach at, go practice at that studio. Get to know the other teachers. Make yourself known. Meet the owner. Then they know who you are and you're going to increase your odds of getting a class there. Yeah. Just the random drop in, not going to work.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. And I think too, it's really important as a teacher to make sure that you're not just shooting emails off to studios without really knowing anything about that studio, because you kind of have to protect yourself as a teacher as well. Like you don't want to just fire a resume off to a studio and get hired there and then be like, oh, like this crowd's not the type of people I like to teach to. I'm not going to work well with the studio owner. Like the classes are not my vibe, my style, any of that. So I feel like it's kind of both ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I think it kind of happens out of this, like, people get into, say, a city with a couple million people and they want to get a job, and it seems really daunting to go around to all these studios that are only open at certain times and pay money to go to classes. Mm-hmm. And it is a lot of work, but I feel like if you do your work well, then it pays off.
Bingo. I agree. Absolutely. Because it's pretty saturated, I feel. The market's pretty saturated. There's yoga teacher trainings everywhere pumping out teachers. And a lot of the people who do yoga teacher trainings aren't necessarily people who want to teach in a studio. But that being said, there's only so many classes. And I feel like quite a lot more teachers. So, yeah, find your niche, be out there, put yourself out there wherever you want to teach and make yourself known.
Yeah, for sure. So do you primarily you just do workshops and retreats now?
Yeah, mostly what I try to do. And that's for a lot of different reasons. So again, back to the beginning days of the 25 classes log. Like, again, that's crazy. I don't recommend people don't do this. But so I'll teach. So right now on my schedule, I teach 4 weekly classes a week, and at different yoga studios. And I keep those. 2 of them I keep because, on a Monday, Wednesday night, it's at the same studio, and I've got a great, committed group of people coming, and that's just fun. I just love teaching that. Mm-hmm. And then the other 2 that I teach it's kind of strategic. I teach because it still keeps me out there in the community and keeps me known. And it introduces me to new people that I wouldn't have taught or met previously. So I look at my weekly classes as a way to be out there and get my name to continue to grow. But I'm fortunate to be in a position where I do mostly teacher trainings and workshops, and because it's a time thing, I have a 5-year-old, and I'm a parent, and I'm at a point in my practice and career where it's a lot of energy to go out and do a lot of weekly classes a week. And my passion anyways is to dive in. So in a workshop, we can dive in. There's that time, there's that space. We're here to learn the nuts and bolts or to go into more detail, and especially on trainings too. That's where I shine. That's where I really feel the happiest doing. I do private clients as well, but I'm on it, and I've done those for a lot of years, and I enjoy them. And there's times where I feel like I love this, I'm going to keep adding more people. And then other phases like I'm in right now where I'm just not as into it. It's kind of funny. I'm not sure why, but it's because I think in the end it's an energy thing. I think when you're one-on-one with somebody, it's a lot of energy. And I think of certain personalities. I love the group energy, and I love teaching groups and talking and discussion and having that space. And the one-on-ones are good, and I have some great success with them, but at the same time, it feels like a little bit more work than I want to do, because parenting is a lot of work too. So that's for me.
Seems to be a trend that I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Everyone tells me it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. Oh my goodness. And especially to be the type of parent that I want to be, where, I'm present and happy and balanced. So that takes work. That's a whole nother topic that we can talk about. But yeah, so I'm grateful that I'm able to create that in my life. I'm able to it's more bang for my buck, both time and money, to do the workshops and the trainings. And yeah.
Is that something that you think that is better once you're more like experienced and into your career?
I would say so. You need to cut your teeth on the weekly classes. I think it takes a lot of skill to be able to successfully teach a drop-in class. Mm-hmm. Because you drop in class, you're going to have all sorts of different people. You're going to have different body types. You're going to have an hour to an hour and a half only with these people. And how do you create a class that's going to be the middle path for everybody in there, right? Yeah. How do you make this so that it's an enjoyable experience and a safe experience for a lot of people? It's a skill, and it's a skill that you can't really achieve until you just do it. And you have to just keep doing it, and you have to keep teaching and showing up, because you learn every time. You learn, I don't know how many times I've shown up to a class where I had a plan, and I was like, we're going to do this. And then I see the people who arrived at the class, and I'm like, and maybe it's the people, maybe it's the energy, the feeling of the day. Everybody's looking really, maybe I might have planned a really active class, and I see everybody and they're just half asleep. Yeah. So it's like, okay, let's change. So what I planned wasn't going to be right. So being able to be fluid like that, like I said, it's a skill that you just got to do. Just teach those weekly classes, teach different groups of people. And you need to continue to acquire your skill set. Teaching workshops, you should have a pretty good base of understanding of whatever you're going to be teaching on that workshop. So the weekly classes is a good place to for the newer teacher to just get comfortable with just teaching, because that's a whole nother conversation. Like, how do you teach? Just because you took a teacher training doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a good teacher. That's an art and a skill that comes, let alone conveying the information and making a good class. It's big. But this is why I get really excited about teacher training.
There's so much, like when you come out of a teacher training, there's so much information like flying through your brain. It's so overwhelming. Yeah. Like the first class I taught was a staff meeting when I worked at Lululemon. And I was just like, my brain didn't stop the whole time. Like, I think it's probably the most, if somebody was monitoring my brain activity, it's probably the most active my brain has been in years. Just like just trying to watch people and demo the right amount and move around the right amount and adjust without losing my spot and losing my cues. And like, it's so much. As a practitioner, you don't really realize, I feel like.
Oh yeah, it's a lot. And that's, and you, I'm sure you're noticing this too. It's like, you just don't get better at it until you just keep doing it. There's an old saying or a quote, and I don't know who said it or where it came from, but, to master something, teach. So to be really good at it, you have to teach. Like a while back, I was trying to figure out, I didn't really completely get a good number, but just the amount of hours I've probably taught is probably in the thousands, like that's crazy to think of. And not all those hours were great. Not all. I'm sure there's been classes that have not been fabulous in my career, but you kind of have to have, or here's another funny thing as a teacher, especially for those teachers listening who are newer. I don't know how many times where I feel like, where I ended a class, especially in my early days, where I was like, oh, I don't know how good that was. And then somebody will come up to me and they'll be like, oh my gosh, that was amazing. And you just, so your own experience is also going to be different from the students, from what you thought was good or bad, the other person, or you might have thought, oh my God, that was the best class I've ever taught. And guaranteed there might have been somebody walking away from that going, whatever. So
yeah, you kind of have to just not watch people, because people give you basically nothing back. That was one of my big learnings right off the get-go.
Yeah. And get to a point where, you're okay with it no matter what, where you can have that confidence in yourself. And even if you feel like you didn't teach the best class ever, but having that confidence that, but that's okay. I trust what I'm doing and I trust myself. Mm-hmm. And one of my best advice for new teachers is truly fake it till you make it. Mm-hmm. Like, as you just said, when you taught your first class, all this stuff was going on. And inside you're nervous and you're thinking, and it's like, you're on. But on the outside, the key, and so this is what I mean with fake it till you make it, is like, you fake that stuff. You present on the outside the calm yoga teacher you are. And on the inside, you're dancing, you're doing this crazy, intricate dance of balancing, like you said, looking at the students, not forgetting, sequencing, so on and so on. And the fake, I don't know how many times I faked it, where I would, even in the middle of the class, if I panicked, I would put people in child's pose, or I would just, let's stand in Tadasana and take a moment and breathe. Yeah. And inside I'm like, okay, let's go here now. But nobody knows. Yeah. So there's the insider secret. Luckily that doesn't happen so much anymore. But But I think that's really helpful, and it's perfectly okay. Yeah. To fake it till you make it, to pause in the class, but as long as you continue to present that professionalism or that calm exterior, until your calm exterior can then match a relatively calm interior after more experience of doing it, and just getting comfortable with it. So yeah, those early days of teaching, man.
Not going back to those anytime soon.
No. But it's funny, I have one gentleman in my class who continues. He's been with me for 13 years. I've moved around and moved about different places. So we've had some breaks in between, but it's kind of sweet that he's seen me in all my changes and evolution over the years. And yeah, it's a beautiful journey.
Yeah, that's really cool that he's continued along with you. Mm-hmm. Like that. Mm-hmm. I feel like that says a lot for you as a new teacher if you've, kept somebody that long. Something resonated with him right from the get-go, obviously. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Yeah. That's interesting. And you made me think too. One time a couple years ago, I went to a yoga class, and so this is judgmental me. Okay. So I go to a yoga class, and it was in I don't even remember where it was, some studio in some place. And maybe the person was new, who knows? I didn't really judgmental teacher me came out, basically, if I'm honest. Right. So she was kind of sequencing, and I was in it, and I was like, what is she doing? And
And I didn't love the class, so I'm in the change room after, and then I heard somebody come out to the class who had taken that class and then talk to her, and she came up to the teacher and she was like, "This is the best class I've ever taken in my life. This was amazing. Thank you so much." And I just had this beautifully humbling moment where, teacher me was like, "Oh, she did that. Ooh." And meanwhile, somebody else in that same class had this like most amazing, beautiful experience. And it was just a humbling moment to go, wow, it doesn't, like, everybody's going to get something at any point. And maybe I might not have agreed with certain things in it, but doesn't ultimately didn't matter for that other person. Right. Yeah. So you as a teacher, there's going to be people in your classes that are going to love it no matter what you do. And then there's going to be people that are going to be like, yeah, I'll never go back there again. And it has nothing to do with you. It has everything to do with you, but nothing to do with you.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of times it's like so much about that person. Yeah. I feel like too, maybe, not coming from a place of a teacher, maybe it's somebody who's like going through something really personal and they're kind of just not in the place where yoga's sitting with them. Mm-hmm. And they hated your class for a reason that's not really about you as a teacher.
Yeah. Yeah. And even if it was about you as a teacher, that's a hard lesson to learn too, even if they did not like you, let's say, and did not like one moment in that class, that still doesn't mean you're a bad person. And that's a journey I think most of us will all have to go through. I've definitely had to do that where, I could have had let's say there was 30 people in the class and I had 29 people tell me that was the best class in the world. But if I had one person say that I did not like that, that's all I would think about. I would not hear the 29 people going, wow, that was amazing. I would only hear that negative response. And so I've had to do my work over the years, getting more clear around that and getting to a place where ultimately I can hear the positivity of the 29 other people and not have that one negative experience stick to me, or reflect upon me as a person. That was the work. That was part of my yoga practice, because teaching and practicing is never just on the mat, right? It's that internal inquiry of these, when we get into these uncomfortable times. So when I noticed I would get stuck on a negative feedback, if I heard that, mm-hmm. that was a sign for me that I had to do my work. I had to uncover what's the root of that. Like why am I only hearing the negative and not hearing the positive? And part of that work was because I just wanted everybody, like when I uncovered all the layers to it, and at the core of that reaction, for me at that time, it was like, well, I just want everybody to love me. Yeah. That person didn't love me. So then something's wrong. And then, so then I had to step up and be like, wait, okay. Hey, yay, good. I found out that I wanted everybody to love me. Yay.
Yeah. It's like pretty incredible that you connected with that.
Yeah. And then it's easier. And then it's like, oh, look at me needing everybody to love me again. Okay. And then we can move on.
Yeah. I think it's so common. Like it seems to be a kind of like almost innately human thing. Like we just really want people to like us, and we want people to love us. And it's kind of like what we really search for. I know children do, like they really search for praise from their parents in that way. And then it kind of transfers into adult life and, careers. We look for praise from our bosses. Yoga teacher, you look for praise from your students.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting, and teaching yoga is a really interesting, back and forth, is because it's like you've got a really immediate feedback loop as a teacher, because you can teach, you can offer what you're offering, the class ends, and then people will be like, oh my God, that was so great. Da, da, da. So you can immediately get this praise. And it's like, ooh, okay, yeah. Yeah. But that works again on the negative as well. And I have also found, because for me, yoga is also this intensely personal experience. And when I'm teaching, I am here is me with my heart on my sleeve. Like I am out there. And so when, getting to that point where I could recognize that part of me being out there and vulnerable, showing myself really, and showing this tender part of myself. And if somebody didn't like that it was like, what? You don't like me. And it's like almost more so than another job. So, if you're a cashier at a store, or or you're a server at a restaurant. You have that professional side of you. And I think yoga is so intermeshed with the personal. This is a practice and I think if you come to teaching, if you start teaching the practice, it's partially because you've had a transformative experience. It's changed you. It means a lot to you on that personal level. And then so you're sharing this deeply personal experience with other people and being like, don't you love it? Let's all love it.
Yeah.
And so it's that maturity and wisdom to recognize, and not everybody will love what you're offering, and not everybody will love, and that's perfectly okay. And that's in fact the way it should be.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah. So, and then that back to that, even that personality thing as we were talking about of, like Sally Joe yoga, that watch that cult of personality, both in yourself and in others, because, if we want to have another 3-hour discussion about the whole cult of personality and gurus, right? And that charismatic personality taking power and taking power away from people. And that's a very slippery slope that I would love to talk more about, but that's a can of worms. I don't know if we should.
We might have to do a second episode on that.
Yes. So I've been there, done that. So,
is this your first teacher training that you're doing? The modern yogi with, Jeff and Lynn?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like first official fancy Yoga Alliance approved one. Yes.
Amazing. Yeah. How's it going so far?
It's good. We had a break over Christmas, so it feels like it's been a while that we're teaching, and I'm doing another one here in Edmonton at the same time as well. So I've got 2 different groups that we're taking through the trainings and little bits and pieces with that. So like bits and pieces, meaning I'm doing a 30-hour training at another studio as well. So all of a sudden it just seems like there's a lot of trainings happening.
Yeah. Is that sort of what you're finding that you are very passionate about now, or?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And again, it goes back to the, having been in this yoga world for so long and seen it change and evolve and grow, and seeing the prevalence of so many new teacher trainings out there and teacher trainees, and seeing that there's a lot of missing information, in my opinion. Ultimately, I really feel strongly that in a 200, no matter what, when you're teaching yoga, 99% of the time you're teaching physical yoga, right? And my philosophy, and I'll put a little side note with that, because my philosophy is, of course, you're never just teaching the physical, right? So the mind body should all be one word. The mind body is all one thing.
Yeah.
When you work in the physical body, you're working with your mind. So that being said, teacher training is more emphasis, because the Alliance, for instance, requires more hours in philosophy than in anatomy. And I don't personally agree with that, because the reality as a yoga teacher is that you're teaching bodies. You're teaching bodies how to move. So if you don't, all the philosophy in the world isn't going to help you properly create a class or sequence a class, or that's going to help all the bodies in that room, or sequence a private one-on-one with somebody with an injury, So that's the time, and that's the stuff that I feel like we need to spend more time on in a training capacity. And like I said, back to that prophecy, is that this is where we're heading. And I'm really excited to be in a position where I'm able to offer that understanding of human movement for yoga teachers, so that they can be better teachers and they can better serve the people that they're teaching.
Yeah.
Because then the philosophy comes. Then the philosophy happens through this subtle experiencing of what is your body? What is fascia? What is biomechanics? That just comes.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. And so you're thinking that you want to do more teacher trainings in the future then?
Yeah. I'm in the midst of so we'll keep doing the modern teacher one, and as long as there's people who want to keep taking that, we'll keep running that.
I would be surprised if there wasn't.
Hopefully. Plus Canmore is such a nice place to come do a teacher training in.
Definitely.
And I'm working with a company right now we're in the midst of doing, I'll probably be doing a 21-day, 200-hour this summer, maybe in Golden, BC. So we're in the midst of doing that. And, I think, and then another studio in town wants to do another 300-hour with me. So I'll do that. But I think in some ways, my own personal journey, I'd be almost the most happy if I could just do my own postgraduate, like 100-hour training where it's not through the yoga lines or anything like that, where it's what I've been talking about with all the movement, where there's a lot more time on how to actually teach. Mm-hmm. So some of the stuff that we've touched on, we don't always get that chance in a 200-hour training to actually get that teaching practice, or some of these questions aren't going to be applicable until you've taught for a while. And then you go, oh, well, now how do I deal with that person?
Yeah.
So that's why it's like, I'm loving this idea of this sort of postgraduate course that's just brewing in my brain. And that's what I bring to all my trainings, but having its own kind of standalone, like, this is human movement. Let's learn about it. Let's learn how to read bodies.
Yeah.
Let's learn a little bit more about embodied anatomy. So anatomy, not just in the traditional sense of how we learn anatomy of like, these are your 4 quadricep muscles. Like, that's not enough. And that doesn't actually tell the whole story. Yeah. So a more embodied approach to anatomy of the connective tissue and whatnot. And yeah, just really exciting stuff. Stuff that people, this is like the practical tools that a teacher needs. And for me, so my story with that is always like last year I did a cadaver dissection course. So I spent a week dissecting a human body, which was literally without exaggeration, one of the best things I've ever done in my life. Cool. And I say with that too, and I've spent time at ashrams. Like I've been in India, like I've done the whole typical yoga thing. Mm-hmm. But out of all of those yogi experiences that I've done, I've never had a more deep transcendental experience than I did when I opened up a human body.
Wow, that's crazy.
From skin to bone. And so going back to what I was saying with the philosophy, that really came clear to me having done that experience. It was like when I had that body laid there on the table in front of me, and from the skin to the fascia, all these layers, it was humanity there in front of me. It was myself there in front of me on the table. It was all these questions that I think humans and in the form of yoga have been trying to answer all these years of like, what is this life? What is this human body? Why aren't we here? I feel like it became so clear through this human form. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, definitely.
As I dissected it, I dissected myself. I dissected everything. And that just honed for me even more that the answers to life are in this human body. Wow. So that's what I mean when I say about the philosophy is that the philosophy stuff comes when we are inhabiting this body consciously. Mm-hmm. Because you don't experience life any other way, right? So while we're in these bodies, we are experiencing everything about our life through it. So the more we can learn about it, the more exciting it becomes, and you just get so in awe. Like you want to have a miracle, you're living in a miracle right now. This is the miracle. This is your enlightenment, is your human form.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I love that.
So the more you're in it with consciousness, and then as a teacher, that's, so we have the shared language of yoga, mm-hmm. right? We're in, so we can say yoga, we can say these asanas, but what we're really saying is, how do I get to know myself? Mm-hmm. And we get to know it through this physical form. So that's my passion. That's enlightenment to me. That's the philosophy. That's all those yoga sutras. It's all wrapped up in this human physical self we live in. And get to share with other people through hugs and kisses and play and movement and gazing into each other's eyes. Like, that's the magic.
Yeah, that's really cool. I love that. It's really cool that you had that experience through like a cadaver.
Yeah.
It's just like, I feel like most people would be like, go meditate for like 10 hours straight. And that's when it happens.
Right. But see, and you know what? That's a beautiful point and then sometimes I feel like we're fed this perception that enlightenment, and I'm using enlightenment with air quotes, like awareness comes through these specific channels. If you do your downward dog, if you step on your yoga mat an hour a day, you will gain awareness. But in my experience, it's not necessarily like that. That might happen at certain times for certain people, but yeah, it could be 10 hours of meditation. It could be 5 days cutting open a human body. It could be sitting underneath a tree looking at a leaf falling. There's no boundaries. There's some avenues that have maybe worked for people before, like yoga, but that's not the be all and end all.
Yeah.
But you can take that wonderment that you find in other places into your yoga practice.
Yeah, definitely. That's incredible. I love that. Thank you for sharing that with me.
Oh, my pleasure.
So I don't want to take up too much more of your day, but are there any other business lessons that you want to share with any listeners that you've learned through your experiences?
Well, yeah, don't ever think that it's ever going to be the same. And that's kind of really an abstract answer, but I mean that in the sense that I hope that your personal practice will always be evolving. Mm-hmm. And the times that you feel that you're stuck, that you don't know, like what I called my yoga existential crisis, or maybe you've plateaued and you don't know where to go, that's a really good place. And be in that discomfort, because it's an uncomfortable place to be in, right? Where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where to go. Who am I? Where am I? Stay with that, because that's where the magic happens. If we can stay in that discomfort, you'll continue to uncover your more authentic voice and your more authentic self, which will shine in your teaching and shine in your business. So I think that's the root. Because as I said before, as a yoga teacher, you are selling yourself. You can't not sell yourself, because it is you sharing your teachings. Mm-hmm. But as long as you can come from a very authentic place, and that authentic place, and to keep it in an authentic place, it's always going to be shifting and it's always going to be changing, because you're growing. So my advice would be to continue just to ride that wave. Don't be scared of the times that you're stuck. Mm-hmm. And don't be scared of the times that you're confused and thinking of those as something's wrong with you, or that you're not good enough. Yeah. But those are places where you're just being asked to grow a little bit more and continue to refine your voice and continue to keep learning. Please, by all means, go to so many different teachers. Go, if you want to succeed as a teacher, ask yourself what success is for you. Is success going to headline a yoga festival? If that's your definition of success, then what do you need to do to get there? Is your definition of success making people feel better in their bodies? Well, then what do you need to do to get there? So I think it's getting clear on what you want to offer and what will make you feel happy. Yeah. And then go from there. So it's that niche. It's doing your yoga. Your yoga. Do your work and get clear, and hopefully things will. And mentors, I feel like that's a really valuable avenue that's not, I don't think we have a lot of time for these days, or is really out there very often. But find a mentor, find a friend, find somebody who you respect, who's got a little bit more experience ahead of you, and ask them. Don't be shy. Everybody loves to talk about themselves. So ask them, how did they get there? And I'm sure they'd be happy to share.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, thank you. I love that. That's amazing.
Hey,
I just have one more question that I've been asking everyone who's coming on the podcast. And that's, if you could, from everything that you know now, is there one piece of advice you would give Brea from 1999?
I just had a moment of awe for her. For young 19-year-old me who just, with this big heart in the world and just thinking that I knew, okay, you know, that, well, this answer kind of comes with a funny story, a little bit, short little story of, you know, just before right around that time, I was living in Nelson, BC before I went to Hawaii. And, you know, I remember sitting on this porch with some friends looking at the stars. And so we're 19, you know, we're young, but it felt kind of old at the time. And I remember saying, like, we're talking philosophy and life and whatnot, and, you know, thinking we had all the answers. Excuse me. Thinking we had all the answers. And then I remember saying these words and saying, man, if I know this much now, what am I going to be like in 10 years? And now it's been 16 years, and I look at that girl and I just laugh with compassion at how much I did not know. You know, that like, but it was a real pure moment of thinking like, life. And cause it's easy when you're 19. When you're 19, the whole world's in front of you. And the more that I know, the more that I don't know. Yeah. And that's a really beautiful place to be. So I don't know if it's advice. It's just, I just have compassion for that sweet, oblivious girl who, sure, I've learned lots, but man, who knows? We'll see in another 10 years. God, how much more will I not know in another 10 years? That's what I think the next phase is.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, like the way life goes. Like when you're a teenager, you kind of have this idea that, you know, you're going to step into adulthood and things kind of like unfold or change for you. And I'm like turning 27 in the next month. And I'm like, man, I thought I would have it like so much more together by the time I was 27.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like
everybody's...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, because everybody's life is it just unfolds in so many different ways. And it's true, we are fed that story of like, you graduate and now your life's in front of you and it goes like this, and this. And like, I owned a business at 24, you know, that's pretty big.
Yeah.
But I also, and then was able, you know, to sell it at 27 at your age. But so that could sound on paper like, wow, you know, wow, ooh. But in reality, it's just part of this ongoing unfoldment of my life. We're at 36 now. I have more of a clearer idea, but at the same time, not, you know, I don't know. It's kind of a beautiful, I love how, and I love how not linear life is.
Yeah.
And the more we can accept that it's going to continue to fluctuate. And by God, I hope when I'm 80, I'm still feel young and like not an 80-year-old and still have questions and, you know, and feel like I don't know everything. So that'll be a sign of a good life for me.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's funny that you said that because I was going to say, thinking about like 10 years from now, like going on like my 37th birthday, it's kind of this idea that like in 10 years, will I have it like any more together than I do now? And I feel like it's kind of what I'm learning is exactly what you said. Like we kind of we learn along the way, but we're never really going to have all the answers.
No. And I don't think we're meant to have all the answers. It would get pretty boring. Like, so I remember a little while back, my 5-year-old said, he's like, I know everything. I was like, no. So, I guess he learned that from his mom, from my own self. I know everything at 19. He's like, I know everything. And I was like, well, you don't. You know, I love you. And you don't. And I was like, you know what, Leo, that's pretty boring if you know everything. Like, what more is there to learn? And so and of course, I'm using this as a teaching moment for him of being like, and scientists are really cool. And scientists are scientists because they don't know everything, because they ask questions. And it's their questions that help them learn and discover more things. And of course he was still stubborn and was like, I don't care, I know everything. But that's always stuck with me for myself, being like, well, right. Let's be those scientists of our own life and continue exploring new territories and feeling the wonder and feeling like I hope to never feel old. Because I feel like feeling old is being settled in a traditional, boring sort of way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, like
kind of almost done with living is kind of Like when you're like, oh, I'm old.
Right.
It's kind of like, oh, I'm done with this life.
That's a good way to put it. That's true. May we never be that way. And I think as yogis, we inherently won't be, you know, and it's going back to the getting uncomfortable and asking questions and just continuing to grow. And growth happens by just learning and growing and exploring and yeah, all that fun stuff.
Definitely. That's amazing. Cool. I won't take up any more of your time, but I so appreciate this. It was really amazing to talk to you. I feel like we could continue all afternoon. But
I know. Well, you've asked me to talk about all the things I love. More.
But no, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's been absolutely incredible to chat with you today.
Wonderful. And I look forward to seeing you in person one of these days when I'm in Canmore.
So there's Brea Johnson. A huge thank you to Brea for coming on the podcast. Just listening to that makes me feel so inspired. So many great business tips and tricks and tools and advice for new yoga teachers. So I hope that everyone out there really enjoyed it. For more information on Brea, once again, check out her website, www.heartandbonesyoga.com. You can also visit www.mbomyoga.com for show notes and resources. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out at info@mbomyoga.com. I always love to hear from you. And as always, thank you so much for listening and being a part of the MBOM community. Bye.